Hello and welcome to another episode of the Alistair Greener Generationally Speaking podcast, where we look at bridging the generation gap by debunking myths, tackling stereotypes and sharing practical tips on how we can build stronger intergenerational connections. Now today I'm talking with an award-winning speaker, communication coach and trainer, known for his ability to engage audiences, spark participation in immersive training workshops. He's earned glowing reviews from some of the UK's renowned organisations, including the NHS, the Metropolitan Police and the Mayor of London's Violence Reduction Unit. So, welcome, Tyler Thompson.
Thank you very much, Alistair. Just a very kind introduction. It's weird hearing it back. Thank you very much.
Shh, no one else knows you wrote it. That's okay. Tyler, it's great to chat. You've got a fascinating background. We were just talking before we started recording about some of the things that you've done, and I actually think this multiplicity of careers is a benefit to someone, because especially in what you now do in helping other people communicate effectively, it gives you that strength of background because you understand many people's backgrounds. I want to start off, though, if I may, just talking a little bit about you and your upbringing and where you came from, because I think that shapes who we are today in many respects, and certainly shapes the way we see life and we see the world. So maybe just give us a potted view of you growing up in North London, what it was like, and you know, how you were.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Edmonton, North London, and Edmonton, I love Edmonton. It's an area that is of like typically low socioeconomic deprivation or high socioeconomic deprivation, but it is home, is what I know. But I think I lived quite an unusual life because I ended up going to this primary school outside the area in Southgate. We mentioned Southgate earlier. And so I lived, and I wasn't rich by any means. Mum scrambled money together from various means, like remortgaging the house, but it means that I ended up going to this school. So I ended up living potentially a different life than I would have had I not. And then from that primary school, I ended up going to a grammar school in Barnet. So then I, lived two separate lives, I guess, of growing up and being in Edmonton and being around things that happen in Edmonton, but going to school outside the area, communicating with people that are very different to myself, different backgrounds, different upbringings. And that was, I guess, how I ended up learning how to speak, was because I got to do public speaking and debating sessions in my secondary school. And so I probably wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now had I not had those opportunities. I may not have the voice that I do and sound the way that I do and be able to relate to going into corporates and speaking to executives the way that I can because of those experiences. So, there's elements of privilege there, and that's what I've ended up doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, and no one can ever underestimate, in my view, the impact of your upbringing on who you eventually become. And, as I always say, that, we are the product of our upbringing in so many respects. I don't want to get into the deep psychology and philosophy of what makes a person who they are, but I have a model called the 5 Circles of Generational Influence, and so many of those influences are about our family life and our immediate peripheral life of school and so on. So I just want to ask one question on that, because obviously you were growing up in an area where maybe children were having very different experiences to you. How did that affect your friendship groups? Did you wind up having many local friends, or were they mostly born out of your schooling?
That's great. That's something I'm still unwinding to this day. So mostly from schooling, which means they're very different to my family upbringing, and it creates a weird thing in your head. Like it's something that genuinely to this day I'm still trying to figure out, because sometimes some friends have very different values because of their own upbringing, but I have this set of values, but we've come together and we've formed this friendship group and close friends with people that maybe I'm not actually that similar to. And then as you get older and you're 20-something, start to unravel because you realise there's actually quite significant differences. And so then I've ended up making different friends elsewhere. But as growing up, it was much more, school focused. It's an interesting. It's an interesting.
Yeah, don't worry. I'm not going to get into unraveling all of that right here and now. But it is interesting because that creates you as the person that Tyler Thompson became. And, in terms of your generation and the people you mix with now, how typical do you feel compared with people of your generation that you mix with at the various places that you work and so on? Would you say that you're a bit of an outlier, or would you say, actually, no, the way I feel, the way I communicate, what I do is probably fairly typical of people of my age?
I think now fairly typical. I do think so. I think so I still work full time. When I'm at the day job, I feel like I can relate to people my age, and the friends that I've made since then. It's often a values thing more so than if you've got similar values, I feel like you can make that work and you can communicate well with each other. So I would say now more typical because I've made different friends, and I still have some of those old friends as well, but I've also made new ones. So I have best of both worlds, shall we say.
Yeah, and that's the natural evolution of life, isn't it? We sort of pick up new friends and others sort of drift off the other end, if you like. And, you've had a fascinating career because you've done quite a few different jobs. You studied at university politics, I understand. And, how was that? Because, again, politics is quite a, it leads to quite radical thinking.
Oh, radical thinking. I loved it. I loved the University of Nottingham. I had a great time, loved the course. I feel like some of my radical thinking maybe I already had it in my brain from before university, from I think seeing how one half of people were living and then going to friends' mansions in primary school and being like, this doesn't seem right. And I think a lot of my thinking stemmed from that upbringing and that experience. So yeah, I loved politics. I loved the University of Nottingham, and then it led me onto a very colourful and mismatched career at times. But it was a great time.
Now, the reason that you and I got chatting in the first place was because I heard you do a speech all about your work with young people. And that particularly triggered something in me because I think the way that people communicate between generations is absolutely the core of what I'm interested in, because I want to be able to bridge that gap so that people actually get each other more, so there's less assumptions, less stereotyping and so on. What led you to actually want to work with children?
It's the same thing that's led my radical thinking. It's the experience that I had growing up, and knowing that where I am today and the opportunities I've had isn't because I'm some sort of special, super hardworking human being. It's because I had certain advantages that other kids might not have. And so my whole mission throughout my 20s and every job has been to sort of redress that playing field and give young people the opportunities to thrive, because I think every young person deserves that. And it's not possible to have equality of opportunity, but I'll do my best to see how much I can influence it. So yeah, so it took me to working in schools, it took me to the summer camp industry, private tuition, mentoring, coaching, any which way I can. That's my real bag. If I could just live off doing that, I probably would. But I need to earn money to exist in this world. So yeah.
How much, one of the things we hear a lot of bluntly demonization of the young by the old, and let's be honest, that's nothing new. It goes back to Socrates talking about, different views of the young and so on. But in your conversations today, when you're supporting younger causes, when you're supporting helping them navigate their way through life, how do you deal with that sort of pushback that you might sometimes get maybe from older generations?
I don't necessarily hear a lot of it. The spaces that I'm in are very pro young people and pro youth work, so I don't necessarily hear as much of it as you might if in different circles. But I think anyone who's demonizing young people is they're playing the wrong game. I think the young people are the future. If they're a flaw that you identify, support them and help them out of those if you see genuine problems. But I think to demonize them and look down on them and criticize young who are still molding and growing, this is the opportunity to help them. So I would strongly disagree with them, but I don't actually hear a lot of it because of the places that I do work.
Yeah, because you're already in an environment where they're accepting of the need to help, and I absolutely echo your sentiments about people who make those judgments. Hence this podcast. I mean, we have a variety of people. I've had the youngest on the podcast has been 15, and the oldest has been 92. So I try and capture everybody in between so that we can become a more generationally cohesive society, if you like. I mean, it's a big aim, but it's something that I feel very strongly about, and clearly you do too. But when we look at you've been working with young people for quite some time. What kind of trends have you seen? What differences have you seen? And especially dealing with, looking after children maybe who do come from tougher backgrounds, who do need that extra little bit of help. What sort of trends are you seeing?
I think the mental health of young people has declined quite significantly. And I've seen, especially in America, just an abundance of medication for anxiety, ADHD, depression in teenagers. And the level of that has just grown rapidly. And some of the behavioral concerns and neurodiversity as well has grown. Maybe we're just identifying it now, but that, from when I first started to now, that has skyrocketed. So that is the big thing. What was the second part of the question, sorry?
Well, actually, I just wanted to pick you up on that, actually, because that's really interesting. And again, I definitely don't want to get into politics. I would love to talk about politics. I love politics myself, but we don't want to go down that rabbit hole. But is it the deep division of society that's causing this problem in the States? Why do you think that it's more pronounced in America than maybe here?
I noticed it after COVID, so I think that was also a thing. A lot of young people going through that experience, missing out on years of the typical socialization at school. And you've got the phones, like these things are not good for adults, let alone teenagers. And I think that is also a big problem. I worked at a camp in Canada this year, and you could see they would give the kids phone time, and it was groups like addicts, like when it was phone time, running, they'd climb around the desk. And so you could see that this thing and the withdrawal from it and the stuff that goes on Instagram and TikTok and all of that can also probably cause some problems in the brain development. So I would say that is part of it.
Yeah, no, very, very well held back on that one. It's a huge, deep topic, and we know that. That social media and COVID, and actually, I think, to be honest with you, I think it was a trajectory we were on, accelerated by social media and COVID. That's my personal view. But coming back to youngsters, how do you connect with them? Clearly, at your age, you're not that far away from them in terms of age. But how do you connect with them? What do you do to enable them to feel that they can talk to you, that they feel that you're actually willing to listen?
I show them. I talk to them on their level. I talk in the way that they might talk. So. Talk about generational.
What does that look like?
They speak in different. They say they have different slang to me. They speak in different ways than I would. I heard the word coded the other day, which is like a slang term for saying something like something else. I never grew up with that, but using some of their terms. Also, just like
I was. By the way, I'll just say on coded. I was in a school the other week, and they wrote some feedback at the end of the day, and they called me slay. And I must admit, I had to look it up afterwards to realise that was actually being complimentary. So you're absolutely right. They speak a different language.
They speak a different language. So adopted that where you can. Embracing work with young people with an element of fun and a smile and a smirk, knowing, not coming in like a teacher of telling them off and X, Y, Z, like just being youthful and fun and it keeps me young as well. So it's fun for me as well, because in the daily grind of life, you can get stressed and miserable. But being at those camps, it's like, oh, I feel young and happy again. So that's a part of it. And listening to them, taking their concerns seriously, and because you are a trusted adult for them, and some of them don't have that as well. So it's taking that responsibility serious. I will say though that I don't have as much energy as I used to, and I can't run and like I do feel tired. I do feel older, but I can still chat in the same way. I would say.
And I love your motivation to work with children, to give them that opportunity, which all of us should be yearning for, to ensure that every child, wherever possible, gets as much opportunity as they possibly can and they get exposed to that. When you're talking to them, you're clearly speaking their language, but how do you motivate them to step out of their comfort zone and to ditch the phone and do other things? What kind of things do you find that you can connect with outside of, as I say, social media?
I often find, I'm thinking of specific examples, a kid whose behaviour was showing up in a bad way because of XYZ issues, but it's finding out what is important to them, the same way you would if you are working with a team at work and you need to understand their why and their motivations. Find out about them, find out what their interests are, their hobbies are, their passions are, and lean into that. Talk about that. Find any connection that you can and lean heavily into that, because there'll be something that you can find, some sort of tenuous link that you can relate to it. So find out their passions, their why, their motivations. What do they want to do when they're older? What do they do on the weekend? What are their friends like? Find out as much as possible, and then once you find something that you can connect to, like John, I would say.
A question that always comes up with youngsters is this balance between, well, you know what, that's just part of growing up. That's not a mental health issue. That's just growing up. Where do you sit on that spectrum?
That's such a good question. Oh, I am much more of a softy kind of person. So I'm more on the, maybe I've been referred to as a snowflake. I don't know. I'm more on that side of the fence, because I think growing up is hard, and there are mental health issues, and I think it often comes from the older generations being like, well, I went through it and I survived and I'm fine, so you can be as well. But then it's like, often you're not fine because you might have a bit more passion if you were fine. So I think I'm more on the, if you say you're going through this, I'm here for you and I'll support you. I'm not going to mollycoddle you. And if you do the wrong thing or you're behaving in ways that aren't right, I'm still going to, have that line. But
well, I was going to say, how do you approach that? What I would call a bit of the tough love kind of approach, where you're showing them guidelines, you're showing them a little bit of structure, because at the end of the day, at some stage, they're going to be coming into a society that requires conformity. How do you broach that one?
I approach it. It's just boundaries. I know that they also want the boundaries as well. So just being clear, that not being afraid to say, this is not okay, what you've done. I still have love for you, I still care for you, but you can't do this, not in this environment, not when I'm around. And it's just having that firm boundary, despite the fact that that they might be struggling with something. And both of those things can exist, I think. So you can have the compassion for them, but then also be like, that's not on. You need to sit out the session, XYZ.
So you're dealing with a lot of youngsters at the moment, as you say, working in London and so on. What are some of the things that you're doing with youngsters today? How are you helping them, and what are the kind of practical things that you're doing that is benefiting them?
So on a practical level, see, the thing is, a lot of the kids I'm working with are now international in terms of like delivery, one-on-one delivery. It's being a the word, I don't like the word role model, but being a role model for that person, and modeling modeling what good behavior could look like, having someone to look up to. Because I know when I was 17, I went to one of these summer camps and I thought the counselors were superheroes, and they weren't doing anything, they were just being themselves. Maybe that's what it is, being myself and being cool with that. But I just thought they were the coolest people in the world, and I wanted to be like them. I went to uni, the same uni as them, so I could be like them, did the same course. And so just being like that for a young person, and giving them someone to look up to, but also allowing them to, when I think about what matters to them and what their why is, pushing them to go pursue that and follow their dreams. And it sounds really corny, but like giving them hope of what could be and what their life could be like, and they don't have to necessarily do this and follow the same path and behave in this way, because things could be better or different, shall we say.
Yeah, and it's quite interesting going back to a little bit before when you were talking about the differences between youngsters in the United States and Canada and the UK. And even within the UK, there's vast differences, as you highlighted already from your own upbringing. Urban areas have their own challenges for youngsters, that if they're not engaged, they might find something that isn't as positive to engage with. What's your view on that, and what should be and can be done about that?
We should provide young people from these difficult backgrounds with opportunities to do the things that will keep them off of a more negative path. So whether that's, sports clubs, youth clubs, which are all getting, drastically cut in funding, mentoring, coaching, giving them an opportunity to see. I think mentoring it can be life-saving. Like having a trusted adult who you look up to, who can steer your way, often someone who's been through what you've been through as well. Like, I think that could just be the best thing for a young person. So giving them opportunities, giving them work experience opportunities, something that takes them outside of the life that they can see that's around them, and give them a vision of what could be possible. Because that's what I had. That's literally, I was able, if you can't see something, then how can you aspire to it? But I could see that this is how people live. Not that I was from, I wouldn't say I'm from a rough background at all. And I don't think I ever would have ended up down this path, but we can't say it. But just seeing a different way of living is what people need, I think, young people especially. They don't know. If all you know is drugs and violence, then that's all you know. That's not their fault either. So, yeah.
No, I loved what you said earlier on about being a role model and seeing yourself as a positive role model, because, again, I'm very fortunate. I come from a background where I did have positive role models, but there's a lot of people, a lot of youngsters growing up in an environment where they don't have that. And all of a sudden gangs or negative paths become the role models that they find. And you've outlined already there some things that, we can do as a society to help prevent that. What do you find when you're teaching youngsters about communication? Because, there's a lot of things about, youngsters don't want to pick up the phone. They only want to message or something. But in fairness, if you've been brought up with that environment, you don't know anything else, and that's the most comfortable mode of communication for you. So how are you helping them in that respect?
So I'm more focusing on the public speaking element and getting them out of their shell there. I would say they are no different to adults, and they have the same fears and reluctance to do public speaking that I have when I'm doing it with a group of adults. That the same fears. Sometimes it can be a little harder to, they might refuse to get up on stage, which an adult probably wouldn't. But the same underlying fear is there. So I think I see them in the same way, and I see it as a more exciting piece of work as well, because you can help mold them at the beginning of their speaking journey. So, yeah, but a similar reluctance that an adult would have, I would say.
Do you think that's changed over the last, I don't know, however many years you've been involved working with youngsters? Do you think that reluctance has changed? Do you think the approach has changed? Do you think that the way they're communicating is changing?
The way they're communicating is definitely changing because of this. Like, I've tutored kids who have used text slang in their essays when they're going to GCSE level. So I've seen that has been a clear shift. So I think the phones and just the general more virtual style of communication, not as in person, the strength of those communication skills is gonna fall naturally. So it's our responsibility as a society to help them with that and get them off the phones. But then we also have to get ourselves off the phone first. And I often hear parents, I don't have kids yet, but I hear parents talk about that, and they're like, I don't like the fact that she's on their phone, but it's like, you're always on the phone. How do you expect her not to do the same thing? So, yeah.
Yeah, I was talking to Mark Saxby in one of the earlier podcasts, who, as you may or may not know, is a social media expert. And he said exactly that same thing. We've got to be aware of what we're doing and the impression we're giving. We're role models, whether they're positive or negative. And the way that we treat the phone is such an important aspect. So I want to finish off, if I may, talking about how we can improve communication between generations. And you're a perfect example of someone who is bridging that gap between. So I want to ask, first of all, tips you've got for younger people to work with older people better, to communicate better. What can they do? I appreciate it's mostly the onus is on adults, and we'll certainly come to them. But is there anything that youngsters can do to improve that communication between generations?
100%. And I know this from working in the NHS, where I was like 23 and working with a team who were much older than me, and being open to one. I feel like young people maybe sometimes they see old people as like, oh, not old people, older people. As an, oh, what do they know? They're old. They don't know our lives now. But they've been through what you've been through like many, many times. So you can learn from them. So be willing to listen to them and communicate them on their level. We ask adults to do, we ask older people to do it to younger people. Also try and speak about their dogs or their grandkids, or that, you can find ways to relate. It does work the same way. And be open to doing that, because you can gain so much value from people who have lots of life experience, and you can become friends with them. I had friends who were much older than me from working in the NHS, so be open to it, I would say.
And that's actually really valuable, because, as you said, if you have been in an environment where you are having to bridge the generation gap, you almost sort of know how to do that yourself, because it's a natural process. So let's now talk about adults. Apart from, let's say, the obvious things of listening and not judging and being genuinely interested, what are some of the other practical tools that people can do as older people to bridge that gap, so that the young don't see the older people as out of touch?
Spend time where they're at. Go and see what's going on this Instagram thing. And I would try and understand their world as much. They're growing up in a different world to the one that they grew up in, and they have different problems. If it's a working environment, the way that they relate to work is going to be different to you, because they're probably struggling with the cost of living. They're never going to be able to buy a home. They probably won't be able to retire. So understand all of their lens as much as you can, and then you can understand why they may behave in different ways. And don't look down on them. You already said don't judge, but that's an important thing. But I would say just try and understand their world, because it's different to the one that you were in.
Yeah, it's funny. I have a model that I use, about 5 steps to get better communication between generations, and one of them is that don't compare, because actually you talking about what it was like for you growing up is completely irrelevant to them. There's a couple of things that might be similar. You went through that same life stage, but actually that life stage looked very different for you as it does for them. Tyler, it's been great chatting. I've really appreciated those insights, and it's great to hear your perspectives as well, as someone who's there working with kids, but also now helping them to communicate more effectively. So thanks very much indeed for your time. We're going to put some details about you in the socials underneath and in the show notes. But for the moment, hopefully catch up with you again very soon. Absolutely. But for the moment, Tyler, thanks very much.
Thank you very, very much, Alistair. Cheers.
And thank you for watching or listening. Really appreciate it. And don't forget, we'll be back again in 2 weeks' time. Bye for now. The Alistair Greener Generationally Speaking podcast was presented by me, Alistair Greener. It was recorded at Granary Studios and produced by James Jones. Please follow us and leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. To find out more, visit generationallyspeaking.co.uk.